Right, what's up guys, it is Starflord here. Today I'm bringing you a brand new video, and this is the entire tier list for Dragon Age Inquisition for all of the specs, which include Champion, Reaver and Templar for the Warrior, Tempest, Assassin and Artificer for the Rogue, and then Knight Enchanter, Rift Mage and Necromancer for the Mage. So obviously this is after Skyhold from level 10 upwards, and hopefully you guys enjoy this. It's a bit hard late game because lots of things just get very OP, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. At the end of it, I want you to all comment below what you think of this video, whether you agree with me, and if you don't, what you would change. It's always nice to hear everyone's opinion because obviously this is just from my opinion and my experience. If you haven't subscribed already, smash that subscribe button, share this video, leave a like, and let's just get straight into it. As always, we're going to have general mobs and bosses and dragons from early game, mid game and late game. You should know the format by now, but text will show you what's going on. Anyway, early game, we're going to start off with the warrior from level 10 to 13. Champion starting off already in god tier, and you guys know why. Champions at this level can already just be absolutely unkillable and survive through everything, which makes them god tier. If you have a champion at this level, even on Nightmare with Trials, I guarantee they will be the ones alive, they will be the ones to never die. Moving down to Reaver into tier 2, you have a bit of damage with Reaver, but you don't really have that much yet, which puts it down in tier 2. Templar all the way down in tier 3, annoyingly. It's just because Templars don't really have any bonuses at this point, apart from going against very specific mobs, which is the reason it has to go into tier 3. Going into the Rogue, Tempest is in tier 1 already. The reason is Tempest at this early can get Flask of Fire and Flask of Frost. Both either give you a ton of survivability or a ton of damage, which is extremely useful this early, which is why it's in tier 1. It's not got enough survivability and damage to be compared to Champion, but it gets itself into tier 1. Assassin, unfortunately, is in tier 2, and the reason is Assassin needs quite a lot of skills and passes and abilities to really shine with just going in and out of stealth and one-shotting everything, so it has to be put in tier 2 for now. An Artificer, though, already in tier 1, because by yourself or with a group, if you have enough crit chance, you can already this low get cooldowns just refreshing pretty much instantly, which is why Artificer has to be in tier 1 this early. Going down to the mages, as you all know, early game it's very hard. Knight Enchanter starting off in tier 2, and the reason is because the Knight Enchanter can actually get a ton of survivability. You can expect the Knight Enchanter to go full survival this early in the game with, yes, little damage, but the fact you won't die just makes it able to hit that tier 2 mark, whereas unfortunately Rift Mage and Necromancer both have to be in tier 3 just because they don't really give enough to be able to put themselves on any power level to be compared to anything else. Obviously Templar is down in tier 3 with them. Going on to the bosses and dragons for the early game though, Warrior again, Champion starting off in god tier because of its survival, Reaver into tier 3 with Templar in tier 3, and the reason is against dragons they really don't give you any bonuses, and you need that defensive bonus in the early game which Champion gives you to be able to go up into the higher tiers. And that's why when we're going into the Rogue with the Tempest, it's starting off in tier 1 because you can get that Flask of Frost, which will mean you will be able to kill dragons relatively quickly, and also with Flask of Fire solo you can deal some serious damage very early in the game. Assassin and Artificer both annoyingly down in tier 3. As said before, Assassin needs a lot of skills anyway to be effective, so against bosses and dragons it's going to be even less. But Artificer is also down here because yes, you might get the crits, but the problem is, unlike Tempest, it doesn't have any survivability, so the second you get hit, you are probably just going to die. Going to the mages, Knight Enchanter again in tier 2. Once again, literally because of that survivability, they have the chance to go a full survival build and therefore do alright against bosses and dragons. And then Rift Mage and Necromancer both stuck in tier 3. Now we are going on to the mid game, which is a level 14 to 17. Going back to the general mobs, starting off with the warrior champion, once again still in god tier because now it's even more overpowered in terms of not dying. You just literally cannot die, and if you do die, I don't know how, pretty much. Reaver up to tier 1, and the reason is it's because it's got quite a big damage boost at this point. I talked about this a lot in my warrior tier list, but Reaver gains quite a nice damage spike at this point. It's not a huge one, but it is enough to put it in that tier 1 against general mobs. When you're against 4 or 5 mobs or just any pack of mobs, you have enough damage to be able to kill them and a bit more survivability than you did before. Templar moved up into tier 2, and the reason is at this point I believe you can actually get the combo, which Templar has, and it's the only thing they have, which means going against general mobs you can pop the combo, deal a lot of damage, but then unfortunately once you've used that combo you don't have anything, and that's why it's in tier 2. If you could use the Templar combo really quickly all the time, then it would be probably in god tier, but unfortunately you can't. Going down to the Rogue Tempest, straight up into God tier. I honestly have changed my mind on Tempest so much through lots and lots of builds with them. The point is, at mid-game, you have so much survivability and so much damage on a Tempest Rogue. You can shred through everything while not dying at all. It's extremely overpowered, and it's on the same level as champion, literally because champion is unkillable. Obviously the Tempest can die, but it's extremely powerful. Assassin and Artificer both in tier 1 for pretty much the same reason. They don't have enough survivability compared with their damage to be able to be that god tier. They have a lot of damage at this point. I would say Artificer more so than Assassin in terms of just overall DPS. Assassin obviously has some crazy burst, but both of them can deal a lot of damage, but when it gets to the point where they're in a situation where they're going to be taking damage, they will just most likely die, which is why they annoyingly have to be in tier 1. Going down to the Mage, everything is in tier 2, and the reason Rift Mage and Necromancer have both moved up and Knight Enchanter has stayed is because Knight Enchanter doesn't really get that much damage extra. It just has as much survivability as it had before, and it can only go into tier 2 because compared to things like Reaver and Rogues, it's just really not able to compete compared to them against other mobs. And the reason Rift Mage and Necromancer have both moved up into tier 2, because at this point they have a lot more damage and a lot more CC, especially the Rift Mage, but the Necromancer walking bomb combos can be insane, and that's why all the mages are in tier 2. Then going to the mid-game bosses and dragons. Once again, champion straight up into a god tier because of its survivability. Absolutely insane. Reaver is in tier 1 like the general mobs, and the Templar has moved down to tier 3, mainly because the combo doesn't really work that great against dragons. Reaver has enough damage and survivability, but unfortunately Templar doesn't. The combo won't really help you that much against bosses and dragons, so that has to be stuck in tier 3. Going to the Rogue, Tempest has actually gone down to tier 1. The reason is because Tempests can get some crazy burst DPS, and what I mean by that is usually burst and DPS are two separate things, but the Flask of Fire throwing knives combo for Tempest lasts quite a long time, and that's what I mean. The burst DPS is where you put Flask of Fire on and throwing knives. Now mid game, you probably won't have the gear yet to be able to one-shot stuff with that combo, and yes, you do have the survivability, but that's only why it's in tier 1. Assassin comes to tier 2, and the reason is it's just got more and more damage than before, which means it's able to kind of solo bosses and dragons depending on what they are, but you don't really have that incredible damage that you do late game yet as an assassin. But Artificer has gone up to god tier, and the reason is that it's not god tier against general mobs, but it does in bosses and dragons, is a strange one. Basically, Tempest in mid-game can pretty much always survive against those general mobs with Flask of Frost. However, against dragons, it's going to be a lot harder with just Flask of Frost to survive. And Artificer, yes, it's worse against general mobs, but that's because there's so many mobs targeting you. When you're playing an Artificer mid-game and you've only got one boss or dragon targeting you, and especially with their higher hitboxes, you can spam the hell out of things like Leaping Shot. So if you're an Artificer Artificer mid game, being an archer as well, you are god tier literally, because at this point you should be able to get enough crit to be able to leaping shot spam, and against bosses and dragons that is enough survivability and enough damage for you to be absolutely insane. The reason that's not against general mobs again is because of their lower hitbox and the fact that there's a lot more of them. Anyway, going to the mages, Knight Enchanter is still in tier 2. It's got the same survivability, but still it just doesn't have any more damage really than it did before. And then Rift Mage and Necromancer both down to tier 3, because against bosses and dragons, your damage really isn't enough. You guys will know if you're playing a Rift Mage or a Necromancer, or if you've seen my streams of my Rift Mage, trying to solo a dragon, it takes forever. And really you don't have enough damage to be that great at soloing, and without the defensives it means when you get caught out it can be devastating. Now we're moving to the late game general mobs, 18 plus, and as I've said before, the general mobs is like small packs or just any mob you would encounter that isn't a boss or a dragon. And starting off with the warrior champion has unfortunately moved down to tier 1. Once again, I want to state it never dies. You won't die as champion, but late game its damage is just not on top or on the level of anything else really, of some of the crazy high damage dealers, which means it has to go down to tier 1 because it just can't compete damage wise. Mid game not everything has crazy damage and the survivability is insane, but late game survivability, some other classes can have great survivability. Champion won't die, but it doesn't have the damage. Reaver has moved up into god tier, and once again this is because of its damage spike I talked about in the warrior tier list. When you get late game a completely full build with Reaver, you are a beast. If played right, you will not die whatsoever, and your kill speed, especially against packs of mobs, is ridiculous, because when you kill one you'll get even more buffs. When one is low you'll get even more buffs, and playing Reaver well in late game is ridiculous. You should not be dying, you should be absolutely shredding through everything, and that's why it's god tier. Templar is still in tier 2 because once again it's just got its one combo and that's it, but late game that combo is actually quite devastating against general mobs. If you've got pack of 4 or 5 mobs and a few of them, if one of them dies or they're just all very low from that one combo, it's still effective, and that's why Templar actually is in tier 2 still and not knocked down, because that combo is really effective when used. But like I said, if that Templar combo was able to be performed a lot more, then Templar would probably be in god tier against general mobs. But anyway, going on to the rogue, Tempest, Assassin, Artificer, compared to everything, they are all god against general mobs. And I mean, do I really have to explain why rogues are god tier? But I will explain for people wondering why all 3 are in god tier against general mobs. And let me point out again that I wanted to state this is general mobs, so this is when there's like a pack of 4 or 5 mobs and they're just normal mobs that you face encountering just across the world of Dragon Age. Tempest god tier. Tempest will not die, and Tempest can shred through stuff with Flask of Fire, absolutely destroying things. You could probably go through an entire pack with 1 Flask of Fire throwing knives, and if you don't, oh well, you Flask of Frost, pop that, freeze them all, then shatter them all. Tempest is in insane spec late game, especially the Tank Tempest build I made once. I must say that's probably one of the best builds ever. You cannot die and you deal just absolutely insane damage, and that's why that's god. Assassin god, late game, one-shotting any mob and then going into stealth, one-shotting, going into stealth, one-shot stealth, one-shot stealth, and that's assassin covered. It's ridiculous burst damage, and then you just get stealth back for free, and so you just pop back in it, kill them, pop back in it, kill them. And then Artificer, once again, the combo now late game is just absurd. The reason why it's god now compared to mid game is now you have the damage on top of your crit chance to just spam things and just everything blows up and dies. I mean, if you're playing a melee Artificer, everything blows up and just gets completely destroyed. And if you're playing Artificer in with the leaping shot build, you're going to do so much damage. You only need a few leaping shots to kill everything. Going into the Mage, Knight Enchanter still in tier 2, and once again because it's got the insane survivability but just not enough damage compared to anything else, because obviously we are comparing this against something like Rogue, and Knight Enchanter can't be called tier 1 against a Rogue. It's just you can't do it. Rift Mage is actually in tier 1. The reason Rift Mage is tier 1 late game is because the amount of CC on top of the damage you can get on Rift Mage, especially playing something like the Infinite Mana Rift Mage, you can practically constantly use every single spell all the time, whenever you want, whenever you need, and it's just crazy CC. If you know and have played a Rift Mage late game, especially against melee mobs, you just can laugh. You can literally, there could be like 20 melee units on you, and you would shred through them. You would literally make them a joke. You can just chuck them down, pull them into a center, throw them all away, freeze them, and then just rinse and repeat. It's just absolutely insane. Necromancer, however, is still in tier 2, and the reason is it's not got crazy survival like KE, but the damage late game and the CC that you actually have from Necromancer can be really efficient at killing mobs. It's not on the Rift Mage level, but because it's got more damage than Knight Enchanter, it kind of levels itself to be the same as Knight Enchanter. So tier 2, tier 1 and tier 2 for the Mage late game against general mobs. So that's the general mobs there, late game. And now on to the bosses and dragons late game. Starting off with the warriors specs against bosses and dragons late game. Champion tier 1. Once again, as always, you cannot die. You will not die. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to kill that dragon. They will not be able to kill you. If they knock you down and CC you for 20 straight seconds, you odds are will not die even then. It's that mad. Going down to Reaver, straight up god tier once again, like the general mobs, because Reaver damage at late game and its survivability is just stupid. You shouldn't die and you should be dealing a lot of damage, and against bosses and dragons you will shred through them. You could literally just charge straight at their face, let them hit you, let them do whatever they want, bite your head off. Even as a Reaver you will still live. It's that insane. Templar all the way in tier 3 once again, because its combo doesn't really work against bosses and dragons. Templar only works well against general mobs, and when it comes to bosses and dragons, the Templar's just going to be let down, whether it's two-handed or sword and shield. It's just really not anything compared to either of the others. Rogue, Tempest, God tier, it has to be. Flask of Fire, Throwing Blades, late game, you could probably one-shot anything. Absolutely anything. Dragon with 200k health, one-shot. It's easy as a Tempest. It's actually insane. Assassin tier 1 against bosses and the dragons. With my experience as Assassin, you will kill stuff and you won't die, but it will just take a bit more time than Tempest and Artificer. Because Artificer, now we're moving on to them, is god tier. You guys should know if you played Artificer, especially the leaping shot build against bosses and dragons. You can get crazy kill times literally just by pressing one button. And if you can kill anything that quickly with one button, you have to be god tier. Going into the mages, it's exactly the same as mid game. Knight Enchanter tier 2, Rift Mage tier 3, and Necromancer tier 3. And the reason is, again, that they don't have the damage. None of the mages have enough damage to really be amazing against bosses and dragons, but the Knight Enchanter just has that survivability that none of them have, which lets it kind of keep above Templar, but not get on any of the tiers as anything else. Because once again, I want to point out, this is a comparison. The reason mages are so low is because if you try and compare them to warriors and rogues, they're not really going to be on the same level in most cases. So that's it, guys. That's the entire tier list for every single spec. Quite a lengthy video. I hope you guys don't mind. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this video. Once again, like I said at the start, comment below on what you have thought of this video and whether you think things need changing. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this video. As always, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, share this video, and I will see you next time.